Hello, welcome to the July 10th, 2026 Club Cubase livestream. My name is Greg Undo, and I'm the host of the livestream today. If you have not attended a live stream before, how it works is you can submit questions by answering that by typing them into the chat field or sending an email in advance to clubcubase@steinberg.de. When asking questions, it's always helpful if you could specify which version of Cubase you're running, what level, so if it's Cubase LE, AI, Elements, Artist, or Pro, which version number, so if it's 13, 14, or 15, also the operating system, such as Mac OS or Windows, that information is helpful. When asking questions, realize that my ability to answer questions in a real-time manner may soon not be possible with the number of questions that come in. We will go through all the questions chronologically as asked. So if you don't see an immediate response to your question, if we could avoid asking the same question repeatedly, that would be appreciated. We will get through all of them until we go through. It will end when we get through all the questions, or get to about 4 hours. And you should have an index of all of the topics that are discussed in today's live stream pinned to the top of the comments field. Might be early tomorrow. I'm going to be going to a concert tonight to see A.R. Rahman perform with the National Symphony Orchestra and meet up with some of my friends who are involved with the concert. So maybe later tonight or early tomorrow morning. And if you wanted to search for topics that have been covered in previous live streams, we have over 2,000 hours of live streams and 45,000 questions. You can go to cubaseindex.com. And we want to thank Jan from Sweden for creating that website. We have two people that serve as moderators, Agent K and Jazz Dude. So neither of them are Steinberg employees. They just do it to make it a better community experience, and we want to extend our thanks to them. We'll also give extra gratitude to Jazz Dude for his work with the unofficial Cubase Nation Discord, which is a wonderful resource of information for the Steinberg community. So if you want to download different links and tutorials, articles, presets, lots of great stuff, templates, all sorts of wonderful things that you could find there. Once again, my name is Greg Undo, and I'm presenting from just outside of Washington, D.C. area in the United States, in Alexandria, Virginia. And if you're watching this live stream, please pop in and say hello and tell us where you're from. And with that, we will go ahead and begin. Great. So we see Jazz Dude sharing for a link for Pink Floyd fans. I'll have to check it out after the live stream. All right. Wonderful to see Walter Blackledge joining who's a member of the St. Louis Club Cubase. Just was sent emails, exchanged emails this week with Joe Blassingame. All right, Matt Gloss is just asking, hi Greg, greetings from Oxford, UK. Following up from Tuesday, looking forward to today's Club Cubase live stream. Hoping you might have had an opportunity to look at disabling folders in an orchestral setup. So let's take a look at what we could do. So I was kind of like halfway there on Tuesday's live stream. And the concept, what we want to do is to be able to say, okay, I have my folders in my template, and I want to be able to say, okay, hit a button and have all of my strings and all the tracks, all the instrument tracks that are within my strings folder. I want those to be disabled. I want to hit another button and all my woodwinds, another button, all of my brass. So first thing I did is, and we'll just go ahead and show this, we'll go to our project logical editor, and I'll just set one up so we had created a project logical editor preset that would disable the selected track. So when I want to come over here, we came up with disable select folder track, or we'll disable tracks in the folder in the selected. Find it here. Okay, so we came up with this project logical editor where we're going to select, and we'll say a container type is equal to a track, and then we're going to say property is set to project is selected. So we're going to basically select this track, and then as a post process, we're going to choose to auto disable enable track. So if I had the track selected, I could come right over here, hit that button, and that would disable all of the tracks or enable the different tracks. Okay. So what we could do now is I will tie this into selecting it by a particular name. So to do that, I created another logical editor preset. So in this case, I did one, we're going to select a track named strings. So let's say I have my oboe 2 selected. So now what I do is I just choose select, and we'll say name is equal to strings. So now that will automatically select the particular folder with group channel named strings. We do that, and now what I want to do is use that as a pre-process for our other, disable the selected track. So what I did is just come over here, and let's say I want to, we're going to disable tracks in the folder named strings. So that logical editor preset that we just made, you would just say, okay, we want to disable, and then we'll see under process project logical editors, and we'll say, okay, we're going to select, disable tracks named strings. So we have that as the pre-process. So before we execute the disable tracks with the selected, all we would do is we're going to select the string folder. So again, I come here, we're going to select the string folder. We're going to, again, take the track. We're going to take all of the tracks there and disable it. So right now I have oboe 2 selected. I run this project logical editor preset, and it's kind of a two-step process. So let's say I wanted to do one for brass. So I'm going to we're going to make a new project logical editor preset. I will go ahead and delete these, and we're going to choose to select, I think we would just say track and name, and we could do equals or contains. So if you want to say wins, so I think we have a brass group here. All right, so here's our brass group. Okay, I'm going to save this as a preset. Okay, so now when I do this, we see our brass folder. If I did this correctly, let's see if we save it as folder track. Okay, so I'm going to just save this as a preset. So we're going to say, okay, so we're just going to replace that. All right, so now I have this channel selected. I'm going to apply that. So let's go back to our other preset, which is disable. We're going to disable the tracks in the selected folder. And what I'm going to do now is just come over here to the pre-process, and I'll just do a search for brass. It'll probably be the only one. So we'll say, okay, we're going to select the track name brass. So let's say I have my bass clarinet selected now, and I want all of my brass to be disabled. So if I did this correctly, and we could just hit the same command to re-enable. So let's go ahead and save this as a preset. So set up like a two-step process, one to select the track, and then once that track is selected, we can choose to disable all of those particular settings, all of those particular, and that same command will enable and enable the particular tracks like so. So let me know if that's helpful for you, Matt. Thanks for coming back to the live stream today. All right, we have Louis Alejo saying hi to everyone. We have Stefan Larson saying hi to Jazz Dude. Tim Weinheimer says thanks for all your help. It makes a big difference using Steinberg products. Always grateful to be able to help people with their creativity. Great. So we see Roland stuff checking in from a far too hot Sussex coast in England. We finally had a little reprieve from the heat. All right, we see Soren joining from Sweden. We see 59 Framus saying hi to everyone. We see also Beverly Beatty joining from Vancouver. All right, and we have George joining from Ghana. Thanks for being part of the community today. All right, so we see Guy0919. Can we create a macro for an independent track loop? Is the and trim on input channel strip or okay? So okay. Sorry, I was reading part of the next question. Can we create a macro for independent track loop? It doesn't have any shortcut and key commands. So let me see if it's usually like for it to take place in a macro, we have to enable it in the key command. So let me just look. It would be under the sample editor, probably. I don't think so. It's going to, and let me see, I'll just check on the off chance that it's, so I don't think that that's going to be addressable in a macro or say a MIDI remote setting. I'll just check here as well. Yeah, so I don't think it's able to be kind of addressed through a macro or MIDI remote. So, but I'll mention that to the team. All right, Jay Tyler asks, I have Cubase 15 LE on Windows. Is the gain trim on input channel strip, or what is that level set for? Okay, so once we have we'll just go to a different project here. Great. Okay, so when we look at a channel strip, what that's going to allow us to do is so when we come over here to our channel strip, and we go to our EQ section, you'll see kind of a gain control here. This is a pre-gain, so it's not necessarily, we could have input gain that would be like when we go to our mix console, we could have input channels, and those input channels, we could attenuate the gain here. But the gain here is going to be often what we call pre-fader gain. So sometimes people may want to like crank the gain significantly on a particular track to get a special type of sound. So let's say if I was feeding a compressor, or if something was just like way too hot coming in, way too hot of a signal, what I could do is just simply come over here and I could adjust the gain, and we could go, 48.2, 48 dB up or down. So we could kind of do, treat this as kind of almost like a gain structure. So if you wanted to have like all of your faders kind of be at 0 dB, you could adjust kind of the input gain. And this gain is before the audio hits the channel. Some people may choose to crank the gain here so that it can hit a compressor harder, and then they could get the colorful characteristics of a compressor without necessarily having to artificially boost the gain afterwards. So sometimes people may just use that as like an input trim, if you will. So that's a concept from a lot of analog mixers. So this will allow you to send more gain before the channel hits the channel. And this would include the channel, all of the insert effects, the channel strip, the EQ, and going to, parallel out to the send effects. So at that point, you could just simply have access to this gain if you wanted to get more gain from the source. If someone recorded a channel, recorded something, and the gain that was captured in recording was a little less than what the other tracks are, you could boost it before it hits the channel so that your fader doesn't have to be all, when you get to the top of the fader and you still need another 12 dB, that's when you could attenuate the gain here on the channel. So that's kind of the intention of it. And thanks for joining us for the live stream. Okay, so we see from 54 Beatmaker, how to record in pattern editor like we do in Groove Agent 6 pattern editor. All right, so let's come over here. Let me just... Okay, so I think that we could do like step entry here. So now if I wanted to come over, so if we were playing this, I could now just kind of come over here. So I think in the pattern editor, we could do step entry, but I don't think that there's a typical record function. But, within the pattern editor, you could just, input MIDI just using the step. So, and I think that may be slightly different than Groove Agent. Let's make sure I'm not missing any parameters here. But yeah, so I think it may be limited to step entry here. So let me know if that makes sense. Okay. All right, so we have Uno Memento checking in from Finland, saying hi to people from around the world. Thanks for joining us. So Luis Alejo asked, Greg, why in Cubase window 15 when I open the pitch shift in direct offline processing, the red and blue notes don't show the default like in previous version? Now you have to click the piano first. Right, so let's just come over here. Let's have, say I want to take this guitar part. Take this from loop here real quick. All right, so let's come over here. Let's go to our offline processing. Okay, so the red and blue notes don't show by default. So let's say I want to I'm not sure if there's settings to turn that on or if you just kind of set the root pitch when, but so you may have to just kind of click, and I think that may be different behavior than previous versions. So let's say, if we now process, so if we've done that and it's auto apply, we listen to loop. And if we undo that, so I'm not sure if there's any, so we listen to our original loop. I'm not sure if there's any particular reason for that. I will open up an earlier version and see if it has changed, but you might have to manually set it. So just to, and maybe that allows you to, if you know what the pitch of the file is, just to use that as the basis point. But I seem to remember it being populated by default, but I'll look into that. Thanks for letting me know. All right, so we see Matt Elston on, just saying hi to Jazz Dude, Agent K, Jan, Michael Teams, and the amazing Cubase community. Great, we have Sounds by Timo from Sheboygan. Thanks for joining us. Being online today, we have Chris Comstock saying hello. So we see, hi Greg, have you ever come across track control settings resetting themselves? I think it happened to me. I lost the volume, pan, and record, for example, and had to put them back manually. Strange. So sometimes, depending on, the track height, we can lose parameters depending on, let's say, the height of the track. So that could be a factor. Also check if you come here to, you'll see kind of like your settings in the lower left-hand corner below the tracks above the lower zone editor. And, you could also, there are different presets. So sometimes it's easy when people are maybe editing to click and switch the presets accidentally. So just see if you come over here to and again, in this lower right-hand corner of the tracks, and if you have the lower zone open, it's going to be kind of just right over there. You'll see this little drop down, and then you could just simply switch back and forth between, there's 4 default presets, but you can just simply switch between those and just see if maybe a different, if you started with a different template, a template may have different settings if you started a project from a template. So check that, but see if you just go back to standard, if things kind of reset as you expect them to. All right, so we see Jazz Dude just mentioning the new release of the Pro Instruments 2 bundle, and that's so just the first one had a lot of great sounds in that. So check that out. I believe it's on discount during the release. All right, so Matt Gloss says, hi Greg, that's a big help now. Disabling enable folders is all said. Is it possible to assign a different key switch macro for disabling and enabling each of the orchestras? So what you'd have to do, sorry, you should have mentioned this. Let's get to your key commands. And we would see it under Process Project Logical Editor. So I'll just hide my macros. It will come over here. Sorry for failing to mention that. So let's go to Process Project Logical Editor, and all you'd have to do now is say, okay, we want to disable all these, and then you could click there to assign a keyboard shortcut. So if you say, okay, delete these in the brass folder, assign a keyboard shortcut. So you could do it like that. If you are in the MIDI remote, so if you want to trigger it from the MIDI remote, we could just come over here and say, okay, I want this particular key. We could double click, and again, we could say, okay, I want this key to always disable tracks in the brass folder and assign that. So now when I open this up, I could just hit this key for brass and different key for woodwinds, one for strings, one for percussion, etc. So yeah, so just assign it and in the key commands or the MIDI remote, and it would fall under the Process Project Logical Editor category. So anytime you save a preset, then it's going to automatically be available there to map from a key command or a Project Logical or a MIDI remote. All right, so we see Michael Graybill joining from Dallas. Michael Teams also joining from Dallas, Fort Worth area, Weatherford. All right, we see Flyvy on from Winnipeg. All right, John Barry just saying good evening from a tropical English Riviera. Great. So I just see a comment from Flyvy. Looks like it's maybe the second half of a comment where I just see in a 7-track montage. So I have a feeling that there's maybe a question before that, but maybe, if you could re-ask your question. Sometimes if it's over 200 characters, you may have to, break it into multiple posts. So. All right, TrackQuest Music says, hi G, can you show how to use MIDI echo to simply make a chord repeat in rhythm patterns in dotted triplets as if you would program MIDI step by step for the same rhythmic pattern like dotted, etc. Okay, so let's come over here. Okay, so let's say I have just a part here. Okay, so now so I just have that on beat 1. Let's get to our MIDI echo. I'm going to go to the MIDI inserts. Let's come over here to your MIDI echo. So the first thing I will do is our pitch offset. I'm going to set that to 0. All right, so now we can come over and make sure I'm on the right track. That would help. Okay, so let's say we will do 16th notes as we play. So let's say now we want this to be a dotted 8th note. And let's say I want the length to be shorter, so let's make the length like 30-second notes. So, and if you want this to be like quarter note, dotted quarter notes. And if we wanted to do a pitch offset, let's say maybe up an octave. So each echo could be say minus 12. We're back to 0. Or let's make it like 8th note triplets. And we could adjust the number of delays here. So let's say I want to do 7. And I want each of these to get down in velocity. And we'll just try 16th note triplets instead. 16th. So let me know if that's kind of what you want to see, Track Quest music. Okay, so we see from Flyv, what are some tricks to adjust audio of different clips to be loud but not too loud? So it's probably within, I think this might be perhaps within the context of WaveLab. So let me open that up. You know, so sometimes, you know, there are, you know, there's, you know, obviously kind of getting a full mix can be an art form, you know, just kind of getting the correct mix. But let's say, okay. Ain't getting much younger, just couldn't see this one through. Like here, we're, you know, just looking at the amplitude of the waveforms, we can see that this one's going to be louder than this one. So let's say I wanted to bring this up. You know, one trick that a lot of people, you know, overlook is, you know, just simple kind of normalizing. So let's say, okay, I want to come over here. It's under process that we can, so let's say we can come over here and like if we wanted to do a number of particular clips together, we could do that. Let me just see if it's, you know, there's, as we're doing this, just let me just do it in the source editor here. Okay, so now when let's say we have this file.
10 days straight with monthly updates. Now I'm the walking dead man.
So let's say, if you wanted to come over here, let's see, I think we could just, if it's going to be under process, so we could come over here to your loudness. So I could say, okay, I want to take this and make it minus 14 LUFS. And now that this is often going to be like an ideal level for...
do what they say I did, but tonight my soul will fly.
And if I wanted to tweak it even a little further, we could go through some of our mastering plugins.
Let the late night news. 10 days straight with monthly updates. Now I'm the walking dead man's blues. There's crying in heaven. Let the rain come down. There's crying in heaven. Confessions of an addict. I had a normal life. Great job, wonderful friends, a big house.
So if we were to kind of bypass that.
One hit was all it took. It robbed me blind.
So to go back to kind of our original file.
There's crying in heaven.
So after we
let the rain come down. There's crying in heaven.
So doing, don't forget to just simply normalize your file. And especially people are always kind of trying to get like the perfect quest to get, your LUFS meter exactly where you want it. But often you could just normalize to the particular LUFS meter as well. Let me know if that's helpful for you, Vince. John Costigan's checking in from the Roman province of Wisconsin. Thanks for joining us. Thinking of you, my nephew is starting his new job in Wisconsin on Monday, I believe. Menominee Falls area, so not too far, maybe an hour away from you. Memento sending greetings from Lake Sama. I'm sure I pronounced that incorrectly. Okay, so we see from TrackQuest Music. Sorry, my chat field just jumped. Is there a way to edit MIDI and audio in the same time, in the same window? That way I could line up everything easily. So, the editors are going to be kind of two separate files, but what you can do is, let's say, okay, I have, just on the main project window. So let's say if I have this event up here, the one thing that a lot of people miss is, if we wanted to, let me just duplicate this a couple times. All right, so, if we wanted to do kind of editing where we could see the events against each other, I will just kind of come over here and let's open up what we call the in-place editor. So this is Command or Control plus Shift plus I. And now as we do this, we could kind of zoom in and I could see all of my MIDI edits, and we'll make these a little larger here. So this way I could see my audio and MIDI edits together like this. So if so you could do it on the main project window. So if you want to open up the MIDI key editor, that's an in-place editor. Again, the keyboard shortcut is Command or Control plus Shift plus I. There's also an icon that could be added. So if we go to your track control settings, we could come over here and you'll see edit in place. We could add that. And now anytime that we wanted to do that, we could just say, okay, we could open up and close the in place editor. So that way you could, instead of having to have two windows, you could just do it directly on the main project window. And that tends to work very well because the sample editor and MIDI editor are going to be different. But if you wanted to edit against each other, you know, that's a great way to do it without having to have multiple windows open. And then you could just pop back to see just the actual MIDI event. All right, wonderful to see Sable Winters on from Bay Area in California. I'm going to be out there November 13th and 14th in San Francisco for the Mono conference, Sable, if you're going to be there. Okay. Reading through comments. All right, so we have Tiago joining from Brazil. Thanks for being online with us. All right, we have Uno Memento wants people to whack the like button. All right, so Michael Team says pretty toasty today here. I know it's pretty toasty at your place too. So it's been a little cooler. Last week we were kind of in 102 degrees, like on the 4th of July. But I think it's only 90, but we've had kind of like afternoon, you know, significant storms every afternoon, evening for the last week here. So since the 4th of July. All right, so you see, I think there might have been a comment in Hindi. You see if I could copy that. I usually keep a Google Translate open. So let me see if I could translate that. Give me a second. I just see there will be no one to ask. So I guess Jazz Dude did translate it. So. All right, so you see from Matt Gloss says, "Oh, Greg, you're a star. My Cubase guru. How can I assign specific keys? Excellent. Many thanks." Great. So we see Dan Fernandez just saying hello from India. Hear Indian music tonight in concert from A.R. Rahman. Looking forward to that. Great. So we have Memento saying hello to Tiago. All right, so we see from Flyv says, first one is how to adjust the audio tracks in WaveLab so they're not really loud. You know, if it's going to be in a montage, you know, so often, you know, we can perceive loudness by the amplitude. You know, see if it's going to be clipping as well. So that's always, you know, there's always people want their tracks to be louder. You know, I've heard, you know, many great rock star artists complain all the records sound too loud, but when they're in a mastering session, they all want their records to be loud. So we'll just come over here. So we'll open this project here. So, you know, one of the things that you could do, you know, if you find that everything that you've worked on is too loud in WaveLab, you know, so let's just come over here. Let's say I'll just select like all of these, and you could think if we just we could bring them all down, but you could, you know, just kind of come over here and be able to adjust the amplitude. So some people may look at this and say, okay, I want that amplitude to be louder or softer, this one. If you do have kind of like a target loudness, like let's say I really like, the loudness of this clip here. One of the things that you could do, again, is just to come over within the montage. And let's say as we go to process, there's the meta normalizer. And what I could do now is we can say we want to match the loudest clip. We can match specific loudness. But we could also just say, I want to match the selected clip. So we will just kind of come here. So we're going to match the loudness of the active clip. And now I could come over here. And so now all of the tracks, when we jump around, will be the same loudness. So a lot of times you may have kind of inconsistent volume levels. So doing that, and now if you wanted to set all of the tracks with the meta normalizer to specific, minus 14 LUFS, or if you're doing broadcast, minus 23 LUFS, you can come right over here and set the particular loudness for your clips there. But you could always just kind of come right over here and be able to adjust just the volume for the clip there, and use your ears all the time as well. And if that's helpful. Okay. All right, so we see Roland stuff. It says, hi, Greg, a little while ago you mentioned offline editing. I can't remember what it's used for and when you'd use it. Can you enlighten me, please? Okay, so let's say I want to, like, anytime I have my drums, I want all of my drums to run through, let's say, maybe like a tape saturation. Okay, so what I could do, let's take these particular drums here. Now let's say I have a slow computer, or I'm handing off a project to someone else. And as we're doing this, realize that maybe they don't have the same plugins. I could now take all of my drum tracks, and let's say I want to run these through. I want to basically embed a plugin in the file itself. So I'll say, okay, let's run it through a Magneto. And what that's going to do is you can say, okay, I want to saturate these tracks more, and that's processing all of my tracks. So let's say, okay, I want to add more. We'll adjust our output here. So as I do this, if you watch, that's just processing all of those files. I'm going to do a high frequency boost. So now, instead of having to migrate plugins that maybe someone who's not smart enough to be running Steinberg products that they don't have access to, you could just simply burn those particular plugins into the audio file itself. So if I undo this, I could just say, okay, and let's say, okay, now, like in a portion of the files, I want to throw a flanger. So I'm going to just come over here, let's select, let's say in the middle of this, I want to apply a flanger for this portion, for those 4 bars. So I'm going to go to my plugins. Let's come over here to my modulation effects. and do a flanger. All right, so now when we play back the file, we'll have 2 bars of non-flanged, 4 bars of flanged, 2 bars of non-flanged. And then we'll have our non-flanged here. So that way we could basically just embed the particular processes into the file. So when we move the files, those processes are, you know, baked into the file. So that way, if you need to pass it off to someone else running a different program, you know, you could still maintain your sound. And the beauty of this also is you can say, okay, I want to keep the flanger, but I didn't like the Magneto plugin. I could just, you know, select all of my files here, go to the Magneto, and say, let's just delete the Magneto plugin. And now we have the flanger, but not the tape saturation. So even after saving the project, we could come over here and just choose to delete all of the processes. The original files are always preserved, so you could go back exactly to the original files at any point in time, whether it's 10 seconds later or, you know, 10 months later. So let me know if that's helpful for you. All right. So we see from Flyvy was second question, and he said all his questions were on WaveLab. Is how to separate tracks with the method Audio Magic or different name. So if that's WaveLab, I'm not sure what it is. I know that there's a Magic Wand selector within Spectral Layers Pro. So if you come over to, let's say, our track, I don't know of a Magic Audio Magic function, but in Spectral Layers, if we have that going, I could take this and be able to select, you know, with a Magic Wand tool here. So if we wanted to just select, you know, this is good for, like, you know, if you have like an audio event. It's not such a great example here, but you could kind of select, like, you know, the different file, like the different components of a sound that's kind of sticking out. But let me know if it's specifically a WaveLab function or not. Okay. All right, so we see from Tiago, it says creating track versions, bounce audio, render in place, flatten, real-time processing did not help at all. I'm having the same issue since older versions and still no help. This happens with every project. Okay. I'll read the first part of the question. Sorry, I'm catching it in the middle. Sorry, I may have missed a couple of our questions. I'll get to that, Tiago. Question. All right, so we see VS Terranova from Amsterdam. And we see Tim K joining from a saber-tooth bicycle, joining from Zeist in the Netherlands. His cat buddy is waving a paw hello. Great. So we see Beverly Beatty. One more time, please. Could you go over ensuring that one has encapsulated everything in the song and all samples and kit and caboodle in case I want to open up the song on another computer? Okay, so let's say if we have samples that are going to be used in different parts of a song. All right, so if we have a sampler track, all right, so I'm going to look at my audio pool here. So we can see that we have a number of audio files in our pool. Okay, so I'm going to come over here. Let's go to our, let's see if I can keep my pool open as we do this. Okay, and our project folder here we can see is under Documents, Projects, Live Stream. Okay, so let's open this up and see if I could, I think there's, it's on top mode here. Okay, so I'm going to now, so we see all my audio. I'm going to drop a sample into the sampler track.
Are we here alone again?
Okay, so we have a sampler track. Let's go to our pool. And we could see that under plugins, we now have that audio file in the sampler track. And when we go to look at the path for that, we see that that's automatically been placed into the file there. If we want to drop it into, let's say, a drum machine,
What dimension am
okay, so let's get to our pool. And we'll come over here to plugins. So now we see that our sample that we dropped into the plugin machine is again going to be in the same project, same folder here. Let me just expand this. Select this. All right, so right now we see that this is going to be the path for that folder. So what I could do now is I'm going to come over here and choose to prepare archive. Great. And once we prepare archive, that file is now placed into the live stream. All right. And if we have Groove Agent,
in the air?
all right, so once I am here, we go to, let's say, our kit, and we choose to export kit with samples. And then I could, you know, we see that the export files at this point, I could navigate in my timeline to say, okay, let's come over here. Let's put this into my documents, projects, to live stream. Hit OK. Okay. This is kind of a protected sample, but at that point you can, that would save it into the folder with user-based samples. These are going to have digital protection, like digital rights protection on them, so that people don't easily make their own samples from it. But when we do that, then we save that, then all of the files are going to be saved within your project folder for you. Beverly says she's made a new cowbell song and need to ensure I get them all. Great. All right, so we have Joseph Thomas Composer just saying hello from Queens, New York. Thanks for joining us in New York, September 24th for the Imsta Festa. If you're around, please go check it out. So we see Danny B6618 saying, hey, buddy. Great. Okay, so we see Tiago, and I think we discussed this a bit on the last live stream on Tuesday. It says, please tell Steinberg support to verify the issue regarding free warp tool in the project window. I use it to manually align multiple tracks in my choir projects. The issue is that after aligning and bouncing and closing the project computer, some and only some of the free warp markings do not keep the exact position, so I have to keep and reworking on alignment. Right, so I'll just do a new project here to show this. It says creating track versions, bounce audio, render in place, and flatten real-time processing do not help at all. I'm having this issue since older versions and still no help. This happens with every project on different machines, Cubase 14 Pro, Win 10, laptop, PC, thanks. Okay, we'll just create new version here. So I think that once you render the file, so let's come over, look for loops. Okay, so let's say we are here and I want to do, I know it's not, I'll show with the vocal example as well.
A new day.
Okay, so let's say I come over and I'm doing free warping here. So I've come over. So when we do this, so right now we see kind of our hit points. Now we see these vertical lines. These aren't warp markers. Currently, they're hit points. We can convert those hit points into warp markers by just going to your audio and we go to the real-time processing, and now we can convert those. All right. So when I move this, all right, so let's say I now go into free warp mode and I want to adjust the timing of this. All right, so let's say we save this project. Okay, I will close the project, and now let's open the project up again. So we'll get to our recent projects. All right, so now when I come over here, we still have the same audio file. I click on it with the free warp tool. We can see our warp points. All right, so those are preserved. But if I come over here and let's say I bounce in place or render the file, this creates a new file. And as we do this, I go to my free warp. You know, we see our hit points is what you see vertically here. We don't necessarily see our warp markers because there's no warp markers that are in this particular file. So you'd have to kind of manually place the warp markers, like, you know, where the hit points are. But once we render in place, you know, we get different files. So let's say if I come over here and I duplicate this track version. Okay, and now I choose to render in place or a bounce selection. So we'll get audio to bounce selection. So as we do this, it's creating a new audio file for us. So I go to my warp tool, and because it's a new file, it doesn't contain any warp markers. Okay, but when I go back to this file, we see the existing warp markers. So let me know if you're expecting to see the warp markers retain their position after bouncing or rendering in place. So maybe if you could clarify that for me. because it's going to be, the warp markers are going to be stored as metadata within that particular file. And if I'm completely misunderstanding, let me know as well. But what we see here, again, the vertical lines, those are the hit points. They're not, we see the grid underneath, but we see where the hit points are. Those aren't warp markers, and that's automatically detected by the file. Okay. All right, wonderful to see Rosta Nick joining from Essex in the UK. Glad you could pop in and say hello. Hope you're doing well. And Michael Teams has granted him chocolate chip ice cream. Great, so 5E just says thanks for your insight, Greg. We see Tim Weinheimer says Greg is the jack of all Steinberg and master of none. Not sure if that's a compliment or an insult. I'll take it as a compliment. All right, so we see John Barry VU just says, hi Greg, could you expand on the offline editing? For example, could I add tape saturation to drum parts? So I have track versions, one original, second track version with saturation. Cheers. So this, when we do the direct offline processing, so let's say if I take this particular file, all right, so let's say I have that file and, I want to do an offline process for it. All right, so if we do an offline process and we could, just hit F7, and let's say if I apply a file, we'll apply the Magneto plugin. So when we come over here, we could just say, okay, we'll go to distortion and we say, okay, let's open up Magneto. All right, so now we've applied that file. So this has been applied to the file. Now, most of the times when people utilize track versions, what they may do is, okay, they'll come over and say, okay, let's do, I'm doing editing here. And now I have, when I just come over here, all right, so now I could say, before we do the edits, I'm going to say, let's make a new version, or let me duplicate the version in this example. So I can say, okay, now this is, before edits. So this is maybe my track version is here, and I could have a different track version. Now, if I wanted to have one with like Magneto and one without Magneto, what you could do is I will come over here. So say, okay, we want this unprocessed version. Okay, then I'm going to duplicate the track version, and then I could do a bounce selection or render in place, and that will make a new file. And then I could come over and say, okay, this one has Magneto on it. So because when we do the offline processing is being applied to the same audio file. If that audio file is in both track versions, if the track version is utilizing the same audio file, then it will be in both. But if we create a separate file by rendering in place or doing a bounce selection, I could now switch between the unprocessed versus the processed with Magneto. So, and if you wanted to, make a macro to do that, you could do that as well. So let's say if we wanted to create a macro, I'll kill this. Let me just delete this track version. So if you find that, okay, I want to do this all the time and keep my unprocessed files and my processed files and switch between them, We could just make a macro to come over. So go to our key commands. This smaller. Okay, so we'll activate our macro. So we will say under track versions, we'll say new macro. So we'll say processed track version. Okay, so we're going to duplicate version. Let's add that command. And then I want to bounce selection. We'll add that command. And then we could just go to plugins. Okay, under process plugin. So let's just come over here to Magneto. So we'll see if this works. Okay. So now what I want to do, if I wanted to take this one file, my original file, and I could do this across multiple tracks, I think if this works as expected, and let's see if it, I may have to select the events here. Okay, here I'm going to select all events on track. Select all on tracks. Let's add that command. I'll erase, delete that track version. Let's delete. All right, so we have, I'll just make sure that we don't have any processing that currently. Okay. All right, so let's see if this will do the trick. So we have this. So at that point, you could just simply, now we have an unprocessed version and a processed version that we could toggle back and forth on different tracks. So again, that macro, if you wanted to set that up, and we will just come over here. We're going to duplicate the track version. We're going to select all of the events that are on that track. We're going to bounce the selection, and then we could run it through the Magneto, and that would just take the default setting of the plugin, which you could modify as well. So if I'm here, let's just delete this version again. So I select the track here, run the macro, and you could have kind of instant drum sound versus the original, and you could toggle back and forth on multiple tracks for your original versus your processed drum at the same time. So by default, the track version doesn't do it. It won't allow you to switch if it's referencing the same audio file. If you bounce the selection or render in place, then you could go back and forth with the track version to listen to processed versus raw tracks. Let me know if that's helpful for you. Great. So we see Flyv just says you got screen working better, looking better. It's great. All right, so we see Roland Stuff says, many thanks for explaining the offline editing for me, Greg. Really helpful, and I did like that drum pattern. So it's from a great track. I probably couldn't play. It's kind of a recreation of a track, and if I played the track, it would probably get dinged on YouTube for a copyright violation because it's that good of a version. So I think it was like a Sting tribute group in Nashville. Great. Michael Teams is calling me Yoda of Cubase, and the force is strong in that one. I think I'm taller than him. But thank you for the kind words. Great. So Flyv says he found an album wizard. All right. So we see Dark Frame Music LLC says, I'm sorry, what is the festival in New York on September 24th? So there's kind of a music technology expo at SAE. It's called IMSTA Festa. IMSTA FESTA IMSTA Festa. So I'll be going up for that. I think it's, or maybe September 26th. It's that Saturday. Sorry. And there's Narwin, and I think October 24th in Toronto I'll be going to. All right, so you see Luis Alejo says, my question was skipped. Let me scroll back. Sorry about that. Didn't intend to do it. Question. All right, so if it was a question about the pitch shift into direct offline processing, about the red and blue notes not showing, so we did go over that. That was the last question I see from you, Lewis. I'm not sure why it's not automatically populating. I will bring that to the attention of the team. But you have to kind of click on it first, as he mentioned. But let me know if there was another question. I don't see another question between that and if you ask another question, please just feel free to type it again. See any other questions? If maybe someone else, yeah, so I don't see any other questions from you, Luis Alejo. But yeah, please feel free to ask again. All right, so we see from Tiago, prior clarification says, sorry about your misunderstanding. I do not need to see the warp markers, but I need the legacy warp markers to stay in exact position after bounce. Please reread the previous question. So I think once you do a bounce of the files, that the warp markers will will in fact not be included in the bounce. So when you're doing a bounce, it's creating a new audio file. So the warp markers from the file that need to be, if you need the warp markers from the file, at that point, I would probably choose to, maybe do it if you need to go back to the track version. So when you create the warp markers are stored within the audio file itself. So we come over here, let's say we have our warp markers. So when we create a new audio file, those warp markers aren't carried over into the audio file. So let's say if I want to make this, and if I need to go back after bouncing, so if I want kind of the benefit of the bounce, say I move these here, I would, just like the macro that we made, I would just come over here and we have I'm going to delete this one. I'm going to delete this track version here. All right, so this is our example here. So if you need to go back to tweak afterwards, so let's go make a macro. Okay, so again, want to duplicate version. And let's see if we have this selected, if I could just do select all on tracks here. So select all on tracks. Then bounce. All right, so we'll just make this kind of really obvious from, say, these two are very close to each other. Okay, so now if I want to run this macro, so now I have, if you needed to go back to the original, at this point, we would just simply come here. There's all my warp markers, and I could go to a different track version for my bounced. But once again, once you bounce the files, the warp markers are associated with that file, and you create the bounce, that's a separate audio file. So that's why the warp markers aren't retained. Again, let me know if I'm still being dense and misunderstanding. Great, so we see from Tim Weinheimer says it's a compliment, definitely. All right, so we see Tiago says with more complex projects with multiple tracks and alignment, some of the audio positions do not stay where I put. So I have sent it over to Steinberg for them to look at your video as well as the project. So I haven't heard back yet, but we'll see. But just have to make sure that that you understand that the warp markers after bouncing aren't retained in the newly created file. All right, so we see from Steve Green 57 says, "Hi Greg, the Pro Instrument Bundle promo states 26 instruments. Are these actual instruments or just loops of the instruments? Kind of confusing." So I believe that there is a Pro Instruments 1 bundle, which I had on my other computer. I'll have to install it on this computer. And that was loops of multiple instruments. So there's like acoustic guitar, electric guitar, there's bass, there was like dobro, like violin, like fiddle parts for bluegrass. So I don't think that they're actual instruments, but sample loops of various instruments would be my thinking. I could have it installed for Tuesday's live stream, just to confirm that. Okay, so we see Ricky Tera says how to play back at half speed, 2 times speed, 4 times speed for quick edit with faster audition. Okay, so if you want the project to play back, so let's come over here. All right, so let's say I have all of my files here all set to musical mode. So let's say we're playing. So if I want to just, go to 200 beats a minute, 300 beats a minute. So I'm not sure if you want the project to play. If you want to come over, there's also just kind of a scrub tool. Or if you want to just put this, and there are like key commands. So let me there's like a shuttle speed play. So let's say if I wanted to play at 2x faster or slower. So let me just come over here. I'll map it to my MIDI remote. So let's say I want this key. I think it's under wind speed for key command. Yeah, shuttle play. So let's say I want this to be shuttle play half. And this to be shuttle play 2x. And let me just say 1/4. Let's see if 1/4 is. And if we wanted to, I'll just do this reverse. Okay, and let's say I want this to be 4x. Great, so let me just map this to x. All right, and let me map this to 4x. And let's say I want this to be reverse 1/2. Or 1/4 for here. So now I could listen to, so look under shuttle play as key commands. And then you could also hit the button again. So play it backwards, half speed. Play 1/4 speed backwards. 4 times faster. 2 times faster. Or just a normal playback. Now, if you're looking for loops, if it's with loops, I'm not fully sure of that, but let's say if we come over here, and we want to just find loops, here we could say, okay, I want it to be half tempo or 2x, or the original tempo. So 2x or 1/2 x. So as you get to audition loops, you could change there. So let me know if that's helpful, kind of what you want it to do. Great. All right, so you see Luis Alejo says, why in Cubase and Windows 15 in direct offline processing? So yeah, we did cover that question, so. Okay, all right, so we see Jazz Dude sharing a link to some howling and sonic instruments played by MIDI. All right, so we see from Steve Green, just says he's not after loops. I would just the instrument. I hardly use loops. Example, jazz piano. It's just a piano sound or just a loop. So it's going to be, I believe, loops for that. All right, so we see Dark Frame Music, just says thanks. All right, so we see from Michael Teams, this is Greg with the issue with Rasta. This is Pablo and I spent about 2 hours working through the issue. He thinks that there's a problem with the voice. Giant Leap. Others work fine when swapped in. Yes, I don't think I'm sorry I didn't get a chance to install that, but I'll make a note to install the Rasta and we could play the Giant Leap. So let me know if it's still a problem that you want me to look into for you. Maybe it's just a setting within that particular instrument. But I will make a note to install that for Tuesday's live stream. Sorry about that, Michael. All right, so we see Rick from Bratman Studio checking in. Says he notices hello is gone when you refreshed. So great to see you on, Rick. Hope you're well. All right, so Tiago says, all right, Greg, thanks for sending Steinberg. Sorry for the bother. I'll wait for Steinberg reply. Sent in our video today. Okay, so we see from Flyv says, how do I export the finished album once everything is done in WaveLab with names and time? So let's come over here. Okay, so let's say, so it could really matter, like how do you want to export it? What format do you need to export it to? Is it just going to be audio files? Is it going to be, on audio CD? Do you want just like a single WAV file? So, you wanted to export to playback in, Apple Music or Spotify, then it's just going to be uploading. But let's say we come over here to album. I have kind of a montage with, several songs in it here. So we will just kind of pop over to our functions. You mentioned in your comment that you went to the album wizard. So if you were sending it, so at this point we could burn an audio CD. So if I want to come over here, we go to functions, we could write an audio CD or a DDP drive. Now a DDP, and I think we discussed this in the last live stream, will allow you, that's a disk description protocol. So, there's free DDP players available. So this is how professionals would share their particular files. And once you do this, also it's helpful if you do go into, and a DDP is basically the data file of an audio CD. So, but here you could go in and edit the CD text, and again, all from the functions menu. So you can put the title, the song, the performer, the songwriter. Usually all these will stay and will be embedded once they've been entered in here, and the title will automatically, as we come over here, the title you could change for each song. So if you wanted to export like one WAV file of the entire album, if you wanted to export the individual files, you could just come over here and just render your files. And then you could say, okay, you want to, do a multi-export. And you can say, okay, I want to do the whole montage. I want to do all titles. And this way, every song could be rendered individually if you wanted to. So again, just do that. Come over here to the render. And at this point, you could just choose all titles, choose multi, and then all of the files will be rendered through the master effects section as individual files. Okay. Michael Teams just saying to Rick that sometimes thinks YouTube is messing with the stream and chat comments. So it seems like it's could be inconsistent at times. So. All right, Steve Green just asked, thanks, Greg. On opening Cubase, we get a pop-up window. Is there a restriction on how many recent projects are listed? How do I clear some of the earlier versions? To see. So there is, a recent project. I think it might be, let me just see if I open up another project here. I've opened this one, so let's say we open up that. So it might be like, 30 or so projects. Not sure, it's kind of an operating system thing of, the most recent projects. So I don't think that there's, if you're looking at the list here for recent projects, don't think that that's quite editable. Let's see if we can maybe edit it in the hub. So if we come over here, you can say, okay, let's see our recent projects here. So let's say I don't need this project open. Let's see. So here we could choose to remove from recent. So we see it's SL13_2. So if I remove that, let's see if it's carried over into our list. Yeah, so it looks like it is. So let's say I want to remove SL13. I will come over here, right click, and we will remove from recent. And now when we go to our recent projects list here, we don't see it listed. So that's how you could do it. Okay. Just reading through some comments here. See Jazz Dude sharing a link to Alice Bino video. Okay. So we see Winayan or Inian. Hi, Greg. Can Steinberg update the analog model plugins so they don't sound analog too clean? Let me know like which analog plugins that you're finding too clean. So, you know, some of the plugins will be modeled and they're modeled after the other sources, so they may not. You could always place, you know, a small distortion plugin in between, you know, plugins. But let me know if there's a specific plugin that you're finding that's modeled too clean, because it could be just modeled accurately. So, you know, it's kind of, but let me know like a specific plugin. But I think, you know, when they do the plugin development, you know, they're very particular to make sure it says authentic to, you know, particular hardware, or taking, you know, the best aspects of classic hardware without being necessarily too derivative. Steinberg as a company has had, you know, and we don't want to necessarily be bound by restrictions on a particular piece of hardware. So, you know, you may come up with, you know, different takes on compressors or EQs. You know, I think a good example would be like the Ultra Shaper, you know, compressor plugin. But let me know if it's something is, you know, like what you're finding that's too clean. And we could see. You see, as Jazz Dude mentioned, analog sound can be very clean. He's a living witness. So that's a great point as well. So great. So we see Raw Justice Hip Hop checking in from Capitol Heights, Maryland, just kind of across the river and up and across the river for me. So thanks for joining us with his plate. All right, so we see, you know, Saber2, we see Tim K just mentioning introducing audio mud to a certain floor depth for lo-fi. Authenticity is a thing, but everyone I know who did lo-fi stuck using that Tascam because it was all they had. All right, so we see just says, why does Steinberg call it a vintage compressor? It doesn't sound vintage. So, you know, I think that, you know, it's the typical workflow that people see and expect. And a lot of times, you know, if you ran that compressor plugin on something that was recorded, you know, on, you know, it was recorded in less than optimum conditions, you would see that the behaviors of the dynamics processing are, you know, aligned with the same particular plugin process, the same processing paradigms that you would see in vintage compressors. So I wouldn't call it false advertising. So, if you have, you may notice it may be more apparent, like, compressors, if you ran some, a drum machine into a vintage, if you ran the latest, if you ran the latest source into a vintage compressor, it's not going to necessarily sound vintage. It's going to just process that particular dynamic in the same way. So I wouldn't call it false advertising. So. Okay. Okay. All right, so we see Ratman Studio just says, Greg, as far as to clean tubes, add a nice second harmonic distortion. Is there a plugin that could add second harmonic distortion to warm the sound up a bit? Yeah, so I mean, just there is a tube plugin that comes with it. Let's just come over. Let me jump back. Okay, so let's go to like the drums that we were listening to earlier. Okay, so let's say we were here. So I'll take the drums and bass, and they're all going into this group folder here. All right, so let's come over to like our distortion plugin. So let's go to .tube. So we'll just bring that blended in a little more. So if you listen to the high end on that, we can now. And let's say if you want to do the vintage compressor. So I would say it's pretty vintagey sounding for a compressor. So if you wanted to run both of those together. no compression and with a vintage compressor. So sometimes people assume vintage is rolling off the high end and adding noise, but that's not necessarily what vintage outboard gear did. I worked in huge studios in New York in my past and when I was younger, and so I would say that's pretty authentic. And even one of the favorite compressors is the tube compressor of my friend Greg Lukens, who's one of the best mastering engineers in the country, if not the world. Probably has some of the best ears in the world, and this is one of his go-to compressors that he uses. And he has the hardware sitting right next to it as well. So, but yeah, so you could definitely get vintage vibes and vintage sounds with the built-in processing plugins that come with Cubase. Okay. So we see from Briley Music, I have several VST3 MIDI arpeggiators. How can I register? So are they actual, so when you say a VST3 MIDI arpeggiator, is it a plugin that has an arpeggiator? Is it, I don't know of any, we have like MIDI plugins that are arpeggiators. So if I wanted to, come over here, let's say to my Rhodes part, I play a chord, and now I can play a chord and have this automatically arpeggiate the chord. This isn't a VST3 plugin, it's a MIDI plugin inside of Cubase. The plugins themselves also have, can have their own arpeggiators. So if I wanted to come over here, let's say, okay, let's come over to edit, the program, and then we could go to like the flex phraser, and I could say, okay, let's take this, let's do like a string sample, or if we wanted to do keyboards, like as we come over here, we can say, okay, let's just do piano and keyboard, and I want like clavinet. Let's do electric piano samples, so now when I play chord. But let me know if it's an actual VST3 plugin. If it's a VST3 plugin, you could have a VST3 plugin that would show up as an instrument and have a sidechain input. For instance, when we go to Groove Agent, or we go to, so we can send MIDI into VST3 plugins via sidechain, or we could also, if we go to, let's say, Groove Agent, in this example, some of the plugins can also just take, output or input MIDI. It's not very common, but here I could set, like, I have a Groove Agent. I could set my MIDI input, from the plugin. So let me know, like, which plugins it is. If it's an instrument that has an arpeggiator built in, many times those arpeggiators won't allow access from other instruments to go into them. But let me know exactly which VST3 arpeggiator that you have or using. All right, so we see from Don M1547, in Groove Agent 6, is it possible to create a folder in Media Bay with my own wave drum instrument samples? If possible, would I be able to have instant preview of those samples? So what you could do is, if you go into your Media Bay, let me clear my throat. Sorry. All right, so if you go into your file browser here, And let's say, one of the things that you could have is favorites folders. Okay, so I'm going to just click on add favorite, and I will come over here and say, let's go to, like I have some Groove agent. So say I come here, right? So I'm going to add, so let's say I have some files here. All right, so I could come right over here. Let's rename, and I'll say, okay, snare one hits or whatever, drum one hits, whatever you want to call it. Okay, so now I could just come right over here and I could have access to all of my snare hits here. So this is independent of Groove Agent, but if you're in Groove Agent, once you save, let's say if I have just a blank instance of Groove Agent here, I could take these particular drums. So I'll take these drums, let's drag them over. So now if I export, right click on the kit that I've made, I could export the kit with samples and place it into a folder. So I can say, okay, let's come here to projects, or I'll go to documents. Let's make, create a new folder. And then we'll say, okay, let's go to snares. And then when we say okay, now if we come over here to our media bay, we could just say, okay, I want to go to my file browser. Let's go to my documents folder. And now we're just looking for snare drum. So that way you could just, again, come right over here and just export the kits. So again, just right click, you say export the kit with samples. Say, okay, I want it to go into snare. So I'll cancel that. So as soon as we come over, so now we could access this inside of Groove Agent as well. So if we come over here to the browser, we could just say, okay, I want to go to, this computer, documents, and then you could just find this snare folder. I may have to refresh it. But, but you could always just save like your favorites here and just drag and drop right into Groove Agent like that. Let me know if that's helpful. All right, so we see from Briley Music says, clear my throat again. It says load the VST3 arpeggiator as a MIDI insert. The MIDI routing approach using 2 tracks, one for ARP and one for instrument, is a bit clunky compared with MIDI inserts. So if again, I don't know which VST3 instrument it is, but sometimes it could be the choice of how the plugin developer has implemented the arpeggio capabilities. If it's allows you to take, VST3 allows the MIDI to go to be routed into plugins for that. Many times the plugin developers choose not to emulate it because, maybe a little extra work. So, so if you could let us know exactly which particular plugins it is, that would be helpful. All right, so we see just comments as the vintage compressor doesn't sound anything like the UAD modeled 1176. It's all false advertising. So I don't think we called it an 1176. It's a vintage compressor. As you heard, it has the characteristics of vintage compressors. And I remember like when TC Electronics, they had the Power Core series, and Universal Audio, when they first had the first UAD1 cards, you know, they both had 1176 and LA2As. And my friend at the time was in charge of TC Works Group. They're based in Hamburg. And he was the one that was in charge of Power Cores, his baby, his project, his vision. And both companies were kind of doing the same thing of powered DSP plugins. And when you compared the two different plugins, even though they were the same models, they sounded very different because the actual hardware that they modeled from was inconsistent and very different. So just because it doesn't sound like an 1176 from another company doesn't mean it doesn't sound like an actual 1176. And you could have 3 different 1176s and they'll all sound subtly different. It's kind of the nature of how much the unit has been used, how hard it's been driven. If it's brand new, the manufacturing process, if you look at 1176, there's, 4 or 5 different manufacturers of the hardware over years with slight variations in parts. So, they will, the hardware sounds different, as does the plugins. And if you can't get a great vintage compressor sound with the vintage compressor, it's probably not the plugin's fault. Great. See, Terry Gray just says, it's a great comment. Terry Gray does like great work as audio pro. Says, I find the more I use Nuendo stock plugins, the more I like them. I spent far too much on third-party stuff. But he loves his FabFilter stuff. Yeah, Terry Gray has a great point. Says, I feel that people are too discerning about the analog sound. They should start investing in hardware. Have fun with the recall. The plugins are great. Yeah, that's when I was working in studios. I was the second assistant engineer, which meant that I would have to often do the recalls, which could take on the console itself. If you have an SSL, it's an E series with the G computer, and with all the matrices, there's 72 buttons per channel on a 56 channel mixer. So you could do the math there. So 3,902 knobs, something like along those lines, that you'd have to manually readjust and, manually recall every outboard piece of setting. So it's just not very practical for, doing a 3 or 4 hour recall for workflow. So, see, Briley Music says Cubase stock plugins can save us hundreds of dollars and lots of time instead of shopping for new plugins, a habit I'm too familiar with. Cubase stock plugins let us focus our time on making music. See, Bratman Studio Rick just saying that vintage demo is fun, yet it reminded me of the old days at the record plant, and that Ilka studio is very cool. I think with DAWs, we kind of forget where we came from and the tools we loved. Great. All right, we see Michael Marshall joining from Somerset in the UK. All right, so we see from FlyV says, in the master section of WaveLab, how can I record any changes to effects? Okay. Okay, so let's open up WaveLab here. Okay, so let's say we have our master effect here. Okay, so let's just go to, say, the master rig here. All right, so let's say if we want to change a particular value. So we could do like some automation. So let's come over here. Let's go to, see if I can remember how to do this. It's been a while. So let's say if we go to, all right, so let's say we want to do this maybe not as a master, but let's see if we go to our output routing. Okay, so so we could have, if we have like a multi-track montage, we could have track one, if we wanted to alternate tracks. So we could have it on tracks if we wanted to have a plugin on clips. So often if we wanted to do automation, so if I click here, I could have a plugin on all the tracks. I could have individual plugins on clips. So if I come here, we could just say, okay, I want the distortion on that clip for some reason. I click here, we get different effects. Then I think come over, we would just, so we see the automation in the envelope. So let's come over here. So I want to, okay, so now let's say if we adjust our clip gain here, so let's say, I think what we want to do is add an automation envelope. So let's go to like our tone in a distortion. And now I could just come here, and this way we could automate the, as we come over here. So once we go to like the automation, so you could do this on a track or the clip based. So usually, we don't automate, and I think we could, so maybe like it's generally going to be applied on the clip base, but you'll see kind of the automation envelope. And then you could just open up the particular plugin and do, and do automation here. So you would see the plugin that we had selected. You could just come right over here, click on the plus, and now you can say, okay, I want this to do spatial instead. So once we do that, double click, and you could create the node and be able to adjust kind of your different parameters like so. So let me know if that makes sense for you. So it's different than a typical DAW workflow, but it's kind of very consistent with mastering workflows. All right, so we just see from Indian says, I want the plugins to be better for people to buy third-party plugins if Steinberg focused on developing their plugins like other DAWs. So I think most people, and I think, and we could point out many Oscar winners and Grammy winners, including Producer of the Year that, are Cubase users. So if you look at, Henry, you got Producer of the Year circuit, or look at even, utilize working with Jean-Marie Horvath or, Teddy Riley. What they do with stock Cubase plugins seems to work very well for them. All right, so we see Soren says, is damper pedal the same as sustain pedal for piano C64? So I'm not really like a great piano player. Let me just check to make sure I give you the right information. So the damper pedal may be the pedal that makes it, and I'm probably misspeaking, but might make it like, maybe the soft tone pedal. So let's say if I come over here, let's look at our MIDI CCs. All right. So let's say we have our, so I guess the damper pedal is the CC64. So, and depending on the library, so let's say if we come over here, let's add another. You want to, here's all the CC controllers. So, but yeah, CC64 is the damper pedal. And there's a soft pedal here, CC67. And I think the sostenuto also could be used as a piano pedal, I believe, is CC66. Sorry for my confusion on that. Okay. All right, so you see from Briley Music says VST3 MIDI only arpeggiators, Venom mode, phrase box. I'll just look it up here on my monitoring computer just real quick. Thanks for sharing that. All right, so it seems, yeah, so if you have to, do, just so kind of see what kind of tools. So I'm not sure, sometimes tools may not utilize all the functions of VST3, so you should be able to, and I realize that, plugin developers will develop for multiple formats, but it's really kind of the plugin's choice. I mean, you should be able, VST3 allows you to take the incoming MIDI and process it. A lot of plugins choose not to do that and kind of work generically so that it, they have the same functionality on perhaps other plugin formats that maybe aren't as robust for the specification. So if you find a workflow doesn't necessarily work, then maybe you could reach out to them. As even try building my own MIDI effects, but can't load as MIDI insert. I have to use routing. So have you experimented? Because if you haven't done this, and it sounds like you kind of are, involved with this, but also check to make sure, like, you could take any. So if you have like the built-in Apache SX, you could take any file, like any pattern that you want, and drag and drop it into there, as that you could also do with the chord pads. So if I have a MIDI loop here, for instance, so let's say I'll just find an organ file here. Find something a little more. Okay, so let's say if I want to drag like this pattern in, I could now come over to the chord pads, and where we see kind of playing chords, I could just drag and drop the MIDI event right into there. And then as we would, we could use that as the basis for when we go into patterns. So, again, just drag and drop MIDI parts and make patterns from that. So as we come over, and then this way you could have like those particular chords play, based on like actual MIDI events as well. So, but maybe see if you could reach out to those companies and see if they could have better VST3 integration. All right. Okay, so we see Don M1547 just says thank you for the previous answer on Groove Agent 6 samples. All right, so we see from Beverly Beatty says, thanks, Greg, for the fave folder idea for Groove Agent. It definitely helps me getting the basics up and running when starting a new song rather than looking at thousands of samples. Beverly's comment says you can spend so long listening to the right snare or drum kick and then miss the vibe you were thinking of. So it's a great way to start a new project. See Soren's working on a new project. All right. See that Val joining from Vienna. It's great to see you on. Says he's the 42nd joiner of the live stream. Okay, so we see a question from Steve Green. Says, last question, I drag my French track from YouTube, convert into Wave. I like the audio drums. I own mixed drums and Spectral Layers Pro. I get a lot of the rest of the song, not just drums. Any thoughts? So sometimes, you could see if, when you unmixed, so a lot of times you'll find that Spectral Layers projects work better when, it's like, I think what it's often looking for is, I've seen better results when the stuff is like maybe like a higher quality recording. So I'm not sure if you have Spectral Layers 13. Spectral Layers 13 will also have enhancements to the algorithm. So in Spectral Layers 13 is just released last week on 9 days ago on July 1st. So if you don't have that, you could try to experiment with that and see if that makes a difference. Sometimes converting a file, so I'm not sure if how you got it from, so YouTube is compressing the music that's introducing artifacts into the music. And if you're, not sure if you're recording the audio from YouTube into Cubase, or if you're converting it to like an MP, there's different tools that will convert the YouTube audio to MP3, and the MP3 into a wave, and when you're doing kind of multiple stages of conversion. So if you have the option of somehow not running through multiple conversion stages, to us it may sound like, oh, it sounds fine, like it's not hateful sounding, but every time that you're doing like decoding from like an MP3 or an AAC file to wave, it's going to introduce a lot of artifacts. So if you have an option to not go through like multiple conversion stages, if it's on YouTube, it's already probably been through 3 or 4 conversion stages at that point. But if you could eliminate those on a way coming out of YouTube, so even if you use a loopback function from your audio interface, if it has that, that could improve the quality as well. Okay. Great. So let me get some questions that were mailed in. Okay, so we had a question. How can I randomize the velocity of MIDI notes to make it sound more human? Okay. Okay, so let me just revert this project here quickly. All right, so, things that you can do, like, just little tweaks of velocity can make a big difference in how, like, we listen to music, so it's not so static all the time. So let's say we'll take a look at this cello example here and see if it's all, let's say these are all going to be like the same fixed velocity here. All right, so I'm going to take all these cello notes. I'm going to come over here to velocity, hold down Control or Command. I'm going to type in 100 for my value and hit Control Command. So all these are now at 100, a velocity of 100. I'll just select all, do it one more time. Just a couple at the beginning. Okay, so as we listen to this, this may sound a bit repetitive. And no real musician is going to play back with perfect velocity every single time. All right, so let's go ahead and we could use, if we want this to just change the velocity on playback, we can come over here and go to a MIDI modifier section. So you may have to right click and go to MIDI modifiers, enable that, and you'll see like a random, we could come over here and we could just say, okay, we want to randomize, velocity range. So at this point, we could just say, let's get a random. Let's randomize velocity. And we could say our max value will be, so let's say, okay, let's make this. And this will change kind of our velocity as it does on playback. So we don't see the change. We just kind of hear the change a little bit. But if I want to use something like a logical editor preset, I'm going to come over here. And if I want to actually change those particular notes, we will say, we're going to say our type is equal to note. So we're going to transform MIDI notes. How do we want to transform the MIDI notes? We want to come right over here and let's adjust their velocity. So we're going to say, let's set to relative random values. And I'm going to say between -15 and 15. So this will take our current velocity of 100 and randomize it 15 values up, 15 values down. So I'm going to hit apply. And now as we do this, if I want to do that again, so we could just so that way we could just simply apply, you know, kind of keep it within the same ballpark, but and you may notice this especially with drums, like you may not want the hi-hats to be the same velocity value every single time that you're, you know, have the hi-hat triggering. So alternating the velocity is a great choice, or just simply randomizing the velocity so it's not playing back the same thing. Many drum samples that would also allow you to trigger different drum samples. So like often with ride cymbals, the higher the velocity, the closer to the bell is where the sample is actually triggered. So again, to do this, you know, just simply we want to go to in the MIDI menu to the logical editor, transform. We want to transform our notes. And so we pick what we want as our target up here. And what do we want to do to our target? And this is the transform action. We want to take the velocity and have it go up or down 15 values. So this way we're not going to get a velocity of 3. We're not going to get, you know, velocities that, you know, may not make musical sense, but we could just choose a range here to increment or decrement the velocities randomly. Okay, so we had another question was mailed in. You just create a project with this. It says, how can is there a way to take a MIDI part at 180 beat per minute sound and have it sound the same speed after changing the tempo to 60 beats per minute? Okay, just create empty project. Okay, so I'm going to have my tempo here at 180 beats per minute. We'll put in some quarter notes. Let's do a quick step entry. Okay, so let's say we have our events here. So we have a bunch of quarter notes at 180 beats a minute. So we listen to it. All right, so we have the timing. So we want to have the tempo switch to 60 beats per minute, but still have it play at the same rate. So audibly, it's the same rhythm. All right, so what we're going to do is, again, go to our logical editor. We will come over and say, okay, we want to do type is equal to note. We're going to transform the note. And what we want to do is to adjust the position. And we're going to divide by 3, since we're going from 180 to 60 beats per minute. And we want to adjust the position. So we could come over here. So we'll say position, and we want to divide by 3. Okay, so now we see that we have this like roughly 15 measure part. So we'll say 15 measures. I'm going to execute this project logical editor. And now we do this. We can see that the MIDI events within the note will be kind of crunched down. And what we want to do is to say, okay, let's make it 80 beats per minute. Or 60 beats a minute, sorry. 180. So now as we play, see, try to do this right. Okay, oh, I did position and position. So let me do position and length. Sorry about that. We will divide by 3. Okay, so now we're listening to, let's say, at 180. So come over here and let's look at our MIDI events. So we'll say apply. And now we're going to play back at 60 beats a minute. So we have the same exact time, the same exact feel, but playing at a different tempo. So again, we could, if you need to do ratios instead of like time compressing the MIDI, you could just simply do this. Now, if we want this event length here is like 1/5 of the time. So we'll make it an even 15 bars here. And I'll take this, let's again run that. Again, we switch to 60 beats a minute. So now what we want to do, if we want to change the length of this event so we don't have 10 extra measures, you could go into the project logical editor and say, okay, we want to transform. And we'll say our media type is equal to MIDI. And we want to adjust the length. And again, divide by 3. Now when I hit apply, that event length is now matching the length of. So we've taken something that was at 180 beats a minute, converted it to playback at the same rate at 60 beats per minute, and also truncated the length of the event to match the current, to match the contents of the current selection. Okay, next question that was mailed in. Why is every loop or audio file that is imported get split to 2 separate files, left and right channels in the project window? Okay, so usually when we go to import an audio file, so let's come over here, let's take just a quick audio loop here. All right, so I import this file, it's going to import it into a stereo track because it's a stereo file. There is a preference, so if you want to come over here, we could go to your Cubase settings or preferences under edit menu on the Windows platform. And if you go to editing audio, you probably have this set to split channels. So when I import, let's get rid of this track. Now, when that preference is set, I want to come over here. And when we drag this in, let me make sure it's that setting is good. So, but just come over here, and if that's happening for you, uncheck split channels on importing audio files. So let me say if I just import the file. we have a stereo file. So now as we import that file, we can see it's automatically split into left and right channels. And that's because of this particular preference file there. All right, let me jump back, see if we have some more questions live. Great. All right, so we have a question from Val. How is the best way to zip project folders to keep them artifact free or even space saving? RAR or I see Jazz Dude just says, RAR or zip, and he says 7-zip is free. I think in both operating systems now that you could compress, and I don't think that there's any degradation to zip files because it's just going to decompress and compress the data. So it's not, it's not doing any like codecs involved with that. So usually just like on Mac OS, you would just come over here. And in years past, I think that you would have to, always have like a third party function in on Windows. I don't think that's the case anymore. I think it's kind of natively built into the operating system. So, but let's say if we come over here, any files that you have, if you wanted to zip this, you could just right click and compress. That's how you do it on Mac OS. And I think it's similar on Windows 11 at least now. But if not, as Jazz Dude mentioned, like 7-zip is kind of a free utility for doing that. All right, we see Gerald Ely joining from Martinez, California. Thanks for being online with us. All right, so we see from FlyV who says, I have an instrumental album in WaveLab. How can I set loudness level different in all of them? All right, so, if you wanted to adjust gain levels, we can just come directly over here and you could, make tracks louder or softer. So, but if you wanted to set it to, like, okay, this track is at minus 13 LUFS or this track is at minus 14 LUFS, again, just come over here. So we go to, see if it's on the, I think you might have to do it on the editor level. Okay, so see if we could just come here to loudness. So here you could see kind of like what the actual values are here for that. But let's say if I just want to, now let's say we go to edit and we click on edit source. So let's say I want to make this minus 23 LUFS. Okay, so let's come over and as we go to your process here, you can just go to your loudness. So you can kind of balance back and forth between the sample editor and a montage. So let's say I want this minus 23 LUFS. So now I come back. I think this will be updated when we come over here. So we can see that when we went back into the editor, so let's say I want this to be softer. Again, I would just go to the edit and edit source. And then we could go to your process, set your loudness here to minus 40 LUFS, quiet, without having to save that project again. I'll come over here and we can see that the gain changes have automatically been applied to the individual files, and that file has been, and we see the montage reflecting those particular changes as well. Let me know if that's helpful for you, Vince. Great. Michael Teams giving out ice cream. We see Val is having iced coffee right now. All right, so we see from Uno Memento. Let's see if my chat field jumped. All right, so we see from Uno Memento, you'd sent a project over. Says, Greg, did you already deal with our Shift plus F thing? I was away for a while, so I'll go ahead and show it now. So Uno Memento, you had asked a question on the last live stream about he's running into a problem where when he imported a tempo track, that when he went to zoom full, which is the Shift plus F key, that it was showing like a lot of weird data on it. So let's come over here. Let me just get to my documents folder. This is the project here. Okay. All right, so we had imported a tempo file here on this particular project. And what I noticed with the project is when we went to project setup, that the project duration was set for 30 days. So that's kind of a long time. And when we look at the particular project here, so I would say when you export a tempo, when you export a track or you import a track from a project and the project duration is set, it's going to place a tempo node at the very end of the project. So if the project was set for 5 minutes, you would see a tempo node at the end of 5 minutes. So when we're at our tempo node and our project length is set for, again, 30 days. So that's probably a little too long. We see that we have a tempo node starting at measure 1, beat 1 for the imported tempo. And our next tempo event here is going to be set to bar or measure 1,782,000. And we see beat 4, 16th note division 4, 120. So let's say, so now when I come over here and I see my events and we hit the Shift F key, that all of a sudden we're at tempo value 106,495. And it seems like everything disappeared like it was wrong. So I would say if you're working with these particular, if it's projects that you're working, change the project tempo and resave it before exporting the files. But if we want to get rid of it, I would just come over here and let's say I'm going to select the very first tempo node in this track. So I'm going to come right over here, select this first node. I'm going to hit the right arrow key, which we see we don't have another tempo node until measure 1,782,000. So I'm going to hit the right arrow key, and then I'm going to hit delete. And we see now that that tempo node here is when we hit delete. So because I had the first tempo node selected, I selected the second tempo node, the one at basically 30 days away, with the right mouse button, and then I hit delete. So at that point, again, I will just come over here. We'll just do that one more time. So select the first node, right arrow over, delete. So now that we've done that, when we could do a Shift F, not Shift S, but Shift F, then our zoom will work as expected because there isn't a data node at measure 1,782,000. So if you run into that, check all of your projects and make sure that you don't have a 30-day value for the project duration, because that could also affect your zooming. I think I told a story recently, like first time I was at Eric Johnson's studio, he was a longtime Nuendo guy. His engineer had a 24-hour session and he couldn't quite zoom into the sample level. And that was because, he had 24 hours, a whole day's worth of time in his project. So he could only zoom down to a certain factor. So if you run into that situation, just make sure that, select the very first node, right arrow over to the second node and hit delete, and then it should automatically be more manageable. So, great. So we see that they have sprinklers on in public squares in Vienna. Sounds like a great thing to do. So we see question, Greg, any news on the mixing room plugin from Steinberg, like Waves NX or Germano or CLA NX? Is it a thing that would be possible someday? So we did kind of partner with, I don't think I have it installed, but if we go to, there's a one that could work in, they could all work in Nuendo. We kind of partnered with a different company to do it. Let me just find it. I don't have it currently installed, but let's say if I go to my download assistant, but you can buy it through Steinberg and you get, I believe it's Larson mastering, and Alan Meyerson's room, who mixes for Hans Zimmer. Open this up because I think it's going to be under complementary products. To check out, the Immerse, like this product. So Immerse with, that's it. Let me just. See, this may not be. But there is, find a one, but look at like the Immersive Virtual Studio. And here, so, but then you could have different rooms with that. So Steinberg hasn't done one, but we have partnered with a company, with the Immersive Virtual Studio to offer that same functionality for Cubase users. Great. So we see from Dan Fran says, "Hi, I'm new here, so welcome to the live stream. Thanks for being part of the community today. Can anyone explain how to make an audio track to MIDI track, for example, bass line with accuracy?" So we could do kind of monophonic support as we're working with, conversion. So let's say if I come over here. Let's say I want to take the bass line in this particular project. So we're going to double click. Then we go to Vary Audio. And then under the functions here, we could just say, let's extract MIDI. All right, and on this, we could just open up a virtual instrument. Let's do one Italian Sonic. Do like electric bass sound. Okay. You'd have to, depending on, you may have to adjust it up an octave. So now we have this MIDI part, drag it here. So let me see if I can move it into the right zone. So again, just go into, just double click here, go into the file, go into Vary Audio. You want to edit the audio segments and then come right over here and extract MIDI. Then you could have your MIDI events for you there. Great, so we see Sables back inside the airport at Fort Myers. Spent a lot of time at the airport at Fort Myers over the years, visiting Brent's music, and do a lot of clinics there with Brent Billman, other guys on the staff. So nice town. Enjoy your time there. All right, so we see from Than Fran says, and can you explain audio warp quantize? All right, so let's say I want to take, okay, So say I want to take a project here. All right, so we can quantize MIDI information, which basically can make it automatically kind of fall on the beat. So let's say if I'm going along here, I'll just... So say, okay, we listen to the bass with the click. All right, so what I could do now is I'm going to come over. If I want this to be tighter, we could just go to our quantize settings here. So we'll see our quantize settings. I can say, okay, so since I'm dealing with audio, I'm going to say, let's do our audio warp quantize. And let's say I want to make it 16 eighth notes. I think it's all eighth notes is small, so I'll just say apply the quantize. So we'll undo. So if we look at my waveform here, so it's like a little out of time. And again, when I apply the quantize, you'll see like it will automatically kind of find the hit points and just shift the musical notes here. So when I'll just hit apply quantize. Now if we have notes that are maybe that we find that are maybe off, like maybe that lead guitar part here, I want to adjust the quantize, and let's say I have it on 2 guitar parts. Let's mute this. So if we find that all right, so we have like these 2 notes here. What we could do is kind of manually warp quantize. So we come over here, let's go to free warp, and I could say, okay, we want to put in, I'm going to select these 2 tracks, and I'm going to go to my free warp tool here. And I can say, okay, let's select so let's say I could put in like different warp markers here. So let's say, okay, as we're listening to this, I could just choose to fix the rhythm. So say, okay, I want this warp marker to fall on the beat. I want this is a little late, so I can just come over here and move these parts around to get them in time, like so. So when we listen to it, you could be very precise, or if I want to make this earlier, I can come over here and just kind of change the times. You can make it worse or make it better, however you want to choose to use the tool. So, but if you want to, just select, let me clear my throat. But, if you want to not have to do that manually, you could just kind of click here. And when you want to quantize audio, just make sure that the audio warp quantize is on. And then as you apply the quantization, you could just have that automatically adjust the parts. So it allows you to kind of quantize audio very similar fashion to what we've traditionally done for MIDI quantization. Reading through comments. Okay. Happy to Sable's on, joining from the airport. Great. Still reading through comments. Still dealing with the heat and grilling techniques. Anna and Sable's watching a stream over Casamigos Margaritas. The rain is coming down in an angry torrent. So yeah, it's usually about 4 o'clock in southern Florida. It kind of goes, you have rain almost, it kind of picks up a lot of rain over the, as the jet stream goes west to east, picks up a lot of rain over the Everglades. So seen some just horrific storms in Miami, Fort Lauderdale around 4 or 5 o'clock. It's pretty typical time. All right, so we see for the immersed decoder, so yeah, you can use that in Cubase, and generally you just place it into the control room for that. Okay. Still reading through comments. All right, so we see from Dan Fran says, Greg, so simple, thank you. Welcome. All right, so we see from Dan Fran says to Greg, says, thank you a lot. I want to make choirs manually. So I have the lead voice and pitch it at Automy with different voices. Now I want to synchronize, and that's what I was looking for, quantize. One of the things that you could do if you're doing like multiple voices together is a thing called audio alignment. So let's see if I have this opened yet. Show you this. And kind of a different technique, and this is really well suited for like background vocals, as you'll see. All right, so let's say as we, if we look at our vocal files here, let's say we have background vocals and they're all just slightly off from their performance. All right, so there is a function here where we could just open up the audio alignment panel. Once we do that, I'm going to select one of the files. We'll make that a target file. And then I'll select the other files here, make them, or we'll use the first one as a reference file. The other ones are targets. So we want this file, we want all of these selected files, the targets, to follow the timing of the reference file. So now I'll just come right over here, align, and now. And you hear how easy that is to clean up parts, and especially if you have parts maybe like multi-mic drums or multi-mic guitar amps, and you wanted to line all the different guitar amps together. you could do that very easily just using the audio alignment functions there. All right, we see that Val just mentioning that ranch dressing from America is going viral during the World Cup here. All right, so we see Jay Tyler says, I had to leave and come back now. Was wondering where the list of hotkeys to function was in Cubase. So if you're on a Windows platform, you'll see it under the Edit menu at the bottom. You'll see key commands. On Mac platforms, can be under the Cubase menu. So we can see key commands here. So if you want to see all of the assigned key commands, we can come over here. We could have it obviously categorized. If you don't need to see macros, we can come over here so we can see all of assigned, unassigned key commands, ones that are customized. So here is all of the assigned keyboard shortcuts, and you could just come over here and modify the keyboard shortcuts. So say, okay, I want to come here. I want this to be, and type in your key. And if it's assigned to somewhere else, it'll give you a warning so that you don't trigger a key command that does two different functions in a program, which could be bad. So again, just come over to, on the Windows platform, you'll see key commands under your Edit menu and key commands under the Cubase menu on Mac OS. Okay. We see Jazz Dude sharing a link to the keyboard shortcuts. Okay, let me go to, I think we had a couple more questions. Okay, so we had a project that was sent in for this. It says, why is every loop, or it says the entire mix file is around 90 beats per minute. The tempo originally detected double time, and we divided by 2 on the tempo detection panel. Metronome click. Attempts are made at erasing anchors. So basically, we have having problems with the tempo map on a project, and then having it align for notation purposes. Right. So let's take a look at this example here. We'll play just a little bit of the introduction so we could hear it. And there's a little bit of a fill that kind of speeds up and slows down. It's a little awkward at the beginning. So I will get rid of our tempo track here. So I'll just select all of the events and delete. So let's listen to start this from scratch. Okay, so let's say we'll listen to the file. All right, so we'll just kind of take that. So I'm going to do a tempo detection on this. So we want, I believe, we have a kind of a, like 5 beats of a pickup. So we have 1 beat, and then it's going to, we'll take our drums. We're going to have a measure of drums and then pickups for the rest of the musicians. And we want to notate like starting there for beat 1. So if we were printing out charts for the band, we could do that. So let's come over to our tempo detection. Okay, so we're just going to come right over here, go to tempo track, to our tempo detection, and we'll do our analysis. All right, so before you close the window, all right, So as we listen to it, it's maybe we want to divide by 2 for our tempo. All right, so I'll just bring the volume of the track down so we can hear the click a little easier. So now we listen to it. All right, so when we do a tempo map, we see that everything, and it will place us in this particular mode as we're working. So I want to maybe say, okay, this is probably a transient there. And so let me just listen to like where the downbeat is here. Okay, and probably this is going to be a transient. All right, so once we do those 2 moves, I think we'll be pretty close to getting kind of the intro for this. All right, and when we do this, you know, so let's say, okay, we have to figure out how to make sure that I want to make, let's say, make this measure 3, and I'll just kind of zoom in here. So let's say, okay, measure 2. I think we want it there. Okay, so let's say, okay. All right, I'm just going to do this one more time. We'll just redo our tempo detection. Okay, so let's adjust this manually. So I think we want measure 2, I think starts there. Measure 3. Okay, so you might have to do like some minor tweaks. All right, now let's make this tempo. We need our downbeat to be, I think, what is measure 3? Or kind of not measure 3, but let's say. All right, so measure 6. So what I want to do is we're going to say, okay, this is kind of a pickup note, and I'm going to start this at measure at 4/4. All right, so now we listen to it, and now if we have a actual MIDI event, we probably want this measure to be measure 1. So we have a 1/4 and a 4/4 measure, so that if we were printing out charts, I will come over here. Let's just add an instrument track. I will double click here. So if I want, again, measure 3 in our timeline to be the like measure 1 on the score, I would now go over to the project setup, and we're going to set our time offset in bars to 2 measures. Okay, you know, I say we have modified the event bar offsets. You want to keep the project content at its bar positions. We're going to say no. And what this has given us is a pickup note of measure 0 or -1. We have a measure 0 where the drums come in, and the full band comes in right on a downbeat of measure 1. So listen to it here. So bar 0, pickup bar. So now when I go into my score editor, I'm just create a blank MIDI part. We open the score editor here. All right, so we can see that we have like a measure in 1/4. So let's say, okay, I want to get rid of the score settings. Let's go ahead and hide my tempo. And let's give it, let's select this bar line here. And we will just go to our bar lines, maybe give it a double bar, say like a at measure 1, and then, you know, we could just add text that says pickup, but now we could have the drum pickup, our 4/4s, and then we could even put just a rehearsal mark or something and have the notation so that this way, when we listen to it, we could just say, and even if we want to now take this and let's add a chord track. If I drag this to the chord track, it'll do its analysis. And when we go into our score editor, we can just have the chords automatically laid out for us as well. So sometimes, you know, like it's a little tricky because it kind of starts and slows down a bit. So sometimes you manually adjust it. But with this, you have kind of a pickup note to a pickup bar and then going directly into the chord. So now you could say, okay, the musicians are going to play starting at measure 1. That's where their big downbeat is with the pickup that's been notated. So that's how you could get the charts to match the tempo of that specific example. Great. Or you just see comment from Sable. It says, so you can, about the Cubasis for Android, so you can export from Cubasis Android into Cubase, but a Cubase project can't necessarily go to the Cubasis version. Okay, so we see from Thanfran, it says, because I'm new to the Cubase community, if you have time, can you explain for newbies, for me, the new interface of the drum machine? Make a house loop, for example. Maybe explain again the chords. All right, so let's say we want to, we'll just do a new project here. Okay, so I'm going to add a drum track. Okay, this will turn it into a pattern event by default. So I'll come over here. All right, so I want to add a kick drum. So I'll select the pad. I want a kick drum. All right, now if I want to adjust the sound of the kick drum, I could add more of a click. I could adjust the decay. I could add distortion. We could change the pitch. Let's come over and say this pad, we want snare drum. So let's go ahead and just adjust our volume down of that overall. We'll do a hi-hat. We will do a cowbell for Beverly. It's a cowbell fan. So we will come over here. All right, and let's put in on a couple of keys here, like a synth sound. So let's say, okay, we want this, and you could have different noise, or if you want an FM synth. All right, so let's come over here. Let's adjust. Right, and I want to, all right, so now I want to, let's put in maybe another percussion event here. All right, let's turn this down. All right, so now we have our sounds loaded here. And let's go ahead and make a pattern. So we're going to go to the editor. We click on the editor tab, and now all the sounds that we just made, we see show up here. So we can say, okay, I want this to be, we'll do 16 steps. So as we play, let's turn off the click. So let's say, okay, I want my kicks here. And if I wanted to adjust the velocity to make this one softer. All right, so let's put in hi-hats. So let's say, okay, I want a hi-hat on every second note. All right, and maybe I want every other one to be softer. And let's go ahead and make this 30-second steps. And let's make it 30-second notes as well. All right, so let's put in just and let's say I want every third note here. So now once we have kind of a pattern here, we could just double click on our project and we could have our pattern populated in our project window. If we wanted to add an instrument such as like one of the synthesizers, maybe Retrolog, and we will come over here. So let's say all right, so let's say I want to, with my Retrolog, we can just add maybe like an arpeggiator here. So we will turn on our arpeggiator. There's all sorts of different presets that we could use. So let's say, okay, I just want to do maybe like a bass. So we could just experiment with some different. All right, now let's say I just want to be lazy. I have this pattern, and let's take this pattern. We'll truncate it to a couple of bars. I'm going to repeat this pattern. I can just come to kind of the right edge here. We'll duplicate. Now I'm going to add just a quick chord track, And chord tracks can be kind of global for the project, but we could also kind of use this to cheat a little bit. Let's say, okay, let's go F, D minor, and you could have Cubase actually help you with chord assistance to suggest chords for you. Or if you want to just kind of put in your own chords, right? So now I have chords, and I'm going to have the chords just trigger. I'm going to monitor this track, and as I play, so we could have that do arpeggiators, or if we just want to play chords. And then if we wanted to just even change the octaves here. So you can make patterns very easily. If you wanted to do a variation on a pattern, you can just come over here, say, let's duplicate, and now I want to have different functions in this particular pattern. And I can say we want this to play back pattern 2 versus pattern 1. So very easy to kind of, build up your own sounds in the drum machine and program the patterns here. And you could use the same pattern editor on any VST instrument as well. Great. So we see Soren has to take off. Thanks for joining us, Soren. Hope to see you on Tuesday. Have a great weekend. All right, so we see Gerald Ely says, thanks for all the hard work you do, Greg. The audio quantize is my tip of the day. Have a great weekend, Greg and everybody. Hope to see you all next week. Thanks for joining us today. Great. Beverly's happy with the cowbell. All right, so we see from Than Fran says, thank you, you're great. You're great for being here on the live stream with us. All right, let's see if we have other questions. I'm going to see if we have any other questions we didn't reach on the questions that were mailed in. Great, I think we have all the questions that were mailed in. We went through. We'll see if there's other questions that pop in. Thanks for all the great questions today. If you've learned something new, make sure you hit the like button and that you subscribe to the channel. And we do these live streams on every Tuesday and Friday unless I have a business travel commitment. But usually, and we have over 2,000 hours of live streams with 45,000 different topics. So you could always search at cubaseindex.com. And we'll see if there's other questions that pop in. That will wrap up a little bit early. Wish everyone a great weekend. I know there's usually about a 20-second gap from when I talk to when you guys hear. So we'll just give it a little bit of time, see if any other questions pop in. See Vince who says, thanks Greg for the info and mastering. See Capital Razor on. All right, so we see, in this drum machine pattern, we can make it audio. Second question, just when you have time. So yeah, so all you have to do, so let's say I want this pattern here. We could just use to go to render in place. Say we'll do it as one event. And now this is our audio file that is just the drum machine. So you could select the track. You could go to edit and go to render in place. And there's different settings for applying different types of processing if you want to have different effects and stuff like that as well. We see a great comment from Sable. It says, Greg, Cubase, the best thing has happened to me in years. So you're a pretty special person. So I'm sure all sorts of other great stuff has happened to you as well. But it's a great sentiment. It's appreciated. All right, so we see Than Fran says, your name is Greg. Great, because I'm from the middle of the stream. Yeah, my name is Greg Ondo, O-N-D-O. I'm based in the United States. So last week, I actually worked for Steinberg. I used to always work for the U.S. distributor Yamaha Corporation of America, and I've switched roles on July 1st to working directly for Steinberg. Makes me happy. My 34-year probationary period is over. Given our 15 seconds or so, if there aren't any questions, then we'll wrap up. Okay, so it looks like we are out of questions. Thanks for all the great questions. We will be back on Tuesday starting at 1 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time. I believe that's 7 p.m. Central European Time, 10 a.m. California Time in America. Everyone have a wonderful weekend. Please stay safe and healthy, and we'll see you back on Tuesday. Thank you very much. Goodbye.